Thanks for having me. I'm happy for the opportunity to be able to meet with you today. My name is Jeff, and I've just started an online anatomy tutoring service called Anatomy and You. And part of the reason I did this is because anatomy is a difficult subject as it is, but with so much of instruction being virtual today, I think that makes it even harder. And so I wanted to create the service that allows me to be a resource for students that are studying anatomy. And I'm going to talk in a little more depth later on about some of the other reasons why I decided to do this. So there's going to be a few parts to this presentation. I'm going to start by talking about my background, and then I'm going to talk about the services that I offer at Anatomy and You. And then the last part of this is going to be an interactive game. And so the purpose of this activity is to get the audience involved, but also to demonstrate some of the strategies that I like to share with my students for studying anatomy. So I graduated from Ohio State this summer. I got my PhD, and my research actually involved birds. And so there was an anatomical component to what I did. I looked at the visual system and also some aspects of the skin of these birds. But even with that said, you might be asking yourself something like, how did this person who studied birds become qualified to be a tutor in human anatomy? So I'm going to walk you through my journey as an anatomy instructor. So in order for me to be a graduate student, to basically fund the research that I did, I needed to work as a TA. And the reason that I started teaching anatomy, and I'm being totally honest here, is that it just worked well with my schedule. It basically allowed me to leave campus for 2 months every spring so that I could do my field work. But I found out that once I started teaching anatomy that I really enjoyed doing it. And a few reasons for this. I really enjoyed the dissections. To me, it was something very real. I had taught other classes like ecology and evolution. And teaching these classes, it was really difficult to come up with activities that were fun and kept the students engaged. But I didn't really find that to be the case with anatomy. And also there's no, interpretation or theoretical debates or anything like that. In anatomy, everything is where it is. And I enjoyed leading these dissections. And so I decided that I wanted to get this teaching assignment again in subsequent semesters. And I thought the most reliable way to do this would be to make myself as valuable as I could be as a TA. And so I decided that I didn't want to just be a good or even a great TA. I wanted to be the best anatomy TA there had ever been. And so I set myself to work in achieving this goal. Now, excuse me, I can't say for sure if I succeeded or not because I haven't seen everybody else be an anatomy TA, but I definitely think that I got myself to that level. There were several things that I did that had not been expected of TAs in the past, and probably most important among these was writing exams. So I wrote exams for both in-person and virtual formats, and especially writing these virtual exams was a real challenge that was interesting for me because I had to come up with questions that students couldn't just look up the answer to. They had to be questions that were encouraging students to compare and contrast and to apply different things that they had learned. And these are things that I think are really important for students. And so having written these exams gives me really valuable experience that I can share with students. And then also I did some other things like leading review sessions and open lab hours. So like I said, I don't know if I was the best anatomy TA there had ever been, but ultimately my approach was successful because I was able to teach anatomy every year until I graduated, and also some other related courses like neurobiology and human biology. So what I wanted to say with this slide is that I wanted to talk about the other things that I enjoyed about teaching anatomy. And, anatomy is an intimidating subject, and I find that to be especially true when it comes to dissections. You have this dead skinned animal in front of you, and you have to do something with it. And so, not surprisingly, you have students experiencing hesitation, not knowing what to do. And I took a lot of satisfaction in helping students overcome that initial hesitation and watching their confidence grow as the semester went on. And to me, it felt good to know that students could count on me to be a confident and calming presence in the lab. And then finally, the other thing that I really took satisfaction from was working with pre-health students. knowing that I was training students that were going to go on to work in health professions that are going to be contributing in a really positive way to society. And so that really felt good to me. And so the next thing I want to talk about is my teaching philosophy. And the most important thing is that every student can succeed. And I really believe this is true. I've worked with hundreds of students over the years, and I found that there's nothing special about a student that allows them to do well in anatomy. It's not an anatomy gene that they have or anything like that. The students who do the best are the ones that put in the work. So they put in the time to study and prepare. But also, what's also important is that they study efficiently and they use their time wisely. And so those are strategies that I emphasize a lot when I'm working with students, how to study most efficiently. The next most important thing is that anatomy really is its own language with its own vocabulary. And so you don't learn a language by just memorizing a bunch of words. You start with a basic vocabulary and you add to that vocabulary by using the language every day. But then you're learning to recognize and apply patterns that are inherent in the language. And then, like any other complex task, you start by mastering the fundamentals, and then you build up to learn more complex aspects of that task. So there are a variety of tools that are available to you. There are websites, software applications, but the tool that you're going to be leaning on most heavily is probably your textbook. And I think there is really a right way to use it, but this is not something that's necessarily obvious. And it's something that I feel that I kind of stumbled upon in the years of teaching anatomy. And so how to get the most out of your textbook is something that I talk a lot about. And then also the way you study is very critical. And so we can talk about the external environment, so where you're studying, what's going on around you, but then also your internal environment. So I'm talking about your mental and psychological state. And it's really important to monitor this as you study as well. And then on top of that, there are other considerations like how much time you spend studying, how long your study sessions are, and then also kind of how you work them into your day and what time of day you're studying. And then once we get to the interactive portion of this, we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but it's really important to be able to boost your ability to remember because as we were seeing before, you don't learn a language by straight memorization. And there's just way too much information in anatomy for you to learn it all through straight memorization. And so it's really important to come up with techniques that you can use to help you remember. And I'm going to demonstrate a few of these for you later on. All right, so I'm going to end this section by talking about what I offer at Anatomy and You. So I do have traditional tutoring sessions where you are either preparing for an exam or you're just stuck on some topic and you need some help with it. But what I'd like to say is that I don't just give you the answer. If you have a question, what I like to do is to kind of walk it back and to make sure that we go over the fundamental concepts that are underlying these topics and make sure you understand those. And then from there, we'll work our way to the answers. So what I like to say is that I don't just give answers, but I work with you to guide you towards the answer. And then in addition to those, I also offer consultations during which I go into much more depth about some of the things I talked about previously, like how to use the textbook and how to study efficiently and structure your study sessions. And finally, and maybe most importantly, what I also offer is follow-up. So what that means is that I don't just disappear when our session is over. I'm going to stay in contact with you and make sure you're still feeling good and confident about where you are. And then if necessary, I will partner with your academic advisor or your student group. So I want to be a member of the team that's helping you in anatomy. And I like students to think of me as a partner or a resource in their studies of anatomy. All right, so now we're going to move on to the interactive portion of this. And so I'm going to ask a series of questions. And normally what I like is for you to just type your answers into the chat in Zoom. And if you like, you can chat it to me privately in case you're concerned that you got the wrong answer and you don't want other people to see it. So go ahead and chat it to me privately if you feel more comfortable doing that. So the way this is, so we're going to start with a few related to the skeletal system. And if you've taken anatomy before, this will be a pretty basic one for you. So we've got two bones in the lower leg. We have the tibia and the fibula. So one of them is big and medial and bears most of the weight. and the other one is small and lateral. So which one is the small one? Go ahead and type your answers into the chat. All right, let's see here. All right, fibula, very good. So this is one that I like to start with because this is a pair of bones that can be very confusing for students at first. They have similar names, right? They have the B in the middle, and there's nothing really about either of these words that gives you any indication into which bone is which. So Noel, if you don't mind, can you tell me if you use some kind of memory technique that allowed you to tell the difference between the two before you just learned which one is which?
So basically, basically fibula is like lying, and tibula is the truth. So, my life is a lie. Fibula, you're lying. The truth stands taller. Tibia, T. Basically
Okay.
that.
That's really cool. I've done maybe 15 of these presentations now this semester, and every time I do this, I get a slightly different answer, and I like hearing them. And anything that works for you is fine. And so mine is actually somewhat similar to yours. And you can remember that the fibula is the small bone because a fib is like a little lie. But yeah, I've heard a lot of other ones with T, kind of relating tibia to the shape of the T, or tibia being taller as well. And so that's really cool. And again, I like to start with this one because, like I said, eventually you'll just learn it. You'll know which is which. But until you get there, you kind of need something to fall back on until you can get to that point. All right, so we're going to stay with the skeletal system for the next one, and we're going to increase the difficulty a little bit. So here we're looking at the humerus, and we've got these two projections on the distal end that are articulating with the radius and the ulna. They're called the trochlea and the capitulum. One of them is pointy, and the other one is smooth and rounded. So which one is the smooth one? All right, the votes are in, and the answer is the capitulum. So the way that I came up with to remember this is that the capitulum is round and smooth, like the dome of the US Capitol. And so both of these, you can see they're kind of word and letter associations. And this one has a visual association tied to it as well. All right, so we're going to do one more with the skeletal system. And this one is going to be a little bit harder. All right, so this is dealing with the carpal bones, the bones in the wrist. And if you've taken anatomy so far, you have seen that there are some very confusing naming conventions. And this is a great, or maybe we should say a bad example of this. So we've got these two adjacent bones. One is called the trapezium and one is called the trapezoid. So of these two, which one is the one that articulates with the first metacarpal? Go ahead and type your answer into the chat. All right, we got some votes for trapezium, and that is the correct answer. So I'm going to share with you the way that I came up with to tell the difference between the two, because something like this, I looked at this over and over again, and I could just not remember which was which. And so once you get to that point, that's a really good time to come up with a memory trick that'll work to help you remember. So what I came up with is that these words start off the same, right? They both start with the prefix trapeze, but in the word trapezium, the I comes first. And since I equals 1 in Roman numerals, this is the one that articulates with the first metacarpal. All right, so I've got a couple more of these left, and you can see that all of these have been kind of letter association. So I'm going to see if I can ask you about something that you may not have encountered before, if you can use the same kind of techniques to figure out what the answer is. So we're moving on to the integumentary system now, and there are two main types of sweat glands in the body. There's eccrine and apocrine. One of these is found only locally in a few places, and the other is found just about everywhere in the body. So of these two, which one do you think is the everywhere sweat gland? All right, eccrine, how did you come up with that one, Noel?
E for everywhere.
Yep, exactly right. So, and that's the way that I came up with too. And again, this is another one where these words are really similar, except for a couple letters. And I just kept seeing these things over and over again. I could not remember for the life of me which one was which. And so I thought I have to come up some way to trigger my memory that will allow me to distinguish between the two. And so I just thought of E for everywhere. So eccrine is your everywhere sweat gland. And one more of these, and we're going to move on to the nervous system here. So we've got these two photoreceptors in the retina, rods and cones, and one of them is processing color, and the other one helps us see in dark and dim conditions. And so which one do you think is the one that processes color? And again, there's nothing about the shape of either of these things that really ties it to its function, rod or a cone. There's really nothing special about one or the other that makes it well suited to processing light or color or darkness. So which one is the one that processes color? Yeah, it is indeed cones. And so I think you probably went down the path that I was hoping to steer you towards. And basically knowing that the word cone begins with the letter CO, just like color. And again, this is the type of thing where you just need something like this until you just know the difference and you know which is which. But also what I was hoping to show you is that using techniques like this will allow you to learn new information really quickly. So as you can imagine, word and letter associations are really powerful for these memory tricks. And I think we have a natural predisposition towards language that allows us to come up with some useful memory tricks for these. And so there are some variations on memory tricks. Acronyms are when we form a word by using the initials of a list of words. And so a really common one that you may have come across before is SITS for the muscles of the rotator cuff. That's supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis. And then again, for these insertions and origins, for the deltoid and trapezius, spine of the scapula, acromion, and clavicle, sag. Another one that I like to use are acrostics. And so if you've taken basic biology, you probably use one of these to remember the different levels of taxonomic classification: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, and so on. So these are useful for long lists, and pretty much everyone will use something like this for the 12 cranial nerves. But other examples of where you can apply these are the layers of the epidermis, the 5 types of white blood cells, and then also the 8 carpal bones. We saw those before. And so basically what you do here is you form a sentence, and the first letter of each word in the sentence corresponds to the first letter of each item on your list. And so what also is really cool about this is that you can make the sentence about whatever you want. And so really with memory tricks in general, it's all about whatever works for you. So it doesn't matter if it's weird or it's silly, as long as it helps you remember. It's just within your own mind, right? You don't have to share them with anybody else. So you don't have to be embarrassed about coming up with something that might be a little bit goofy, as long as it helps you to remember. And I just want to emphasize again how important these memory tips and tricks are. And really anybody who has studied anatomy has used these tricks, including your professor. And even when you get into really complex upper level anatomy textbooks, they will still be sharing memory tips and tricks like this. So it's not like it's a basic or introductory technique. So I want to thank you again for inviting me today and letting me join your group. If you want to learn more about me, you can go to my website, anatomyandyou.com. And here's my email address, which is jeff@anatomyandyou.com. You can find me on social media. My handles are pretty much all the same for these. And then for YouTube, I have started a series of videos that go through memory tips and tricks like the ones that we did today. So I've got 3 episodes up right now, and then later in the week, I'll be recording my 4th episode, and I hope to have that up next week. So stay tuned for that. And then finally, as a gesture of thanks for inviting me here today, I'm going to share this coupon code with you, UA20, and that's going to give you 20% off individual tutoring sessions until the beginning of June. So thanks. And if you had any questions about me, I would be happy to answer those.
Sweet, thank you. Yeah, I guess you can stop recording and then I can post that. So I
Okay.
can